All right, my name's Ray Greene. Let's see, I've been an RF engineer on a lot of jobs in life. God's given me a lot of different, He's put a lot of different things in my hands to do, and I've been blessed to be able to do them. And we live here, we're in Mount Vernon, well, we're in Fredericktown, but close to Mount Vernon. We co-pastored a church in upstate New York, Middletown, New York, about 80 miles northwest of New York City. And I've done various different things as chaplain type services with my work in different companies. My latest work, I was an RF engineer with a cellular company, and I was a interference mitigation specialist, whatever. But I looked for interference for cellular companies and worked all kinds of different RF things. Prior to that, at the time of 9/11, I was working for a company in Manhattan, and actually in New York. It was a nationwide company, but it was a startup company. I always like startup companies. They like to spend money and give you a chance to do all kinds of things, and it's fun. But I was with a company based out in the company. We started out in Washington, D.C., but they expanded, and New York City basically took over. And I was working for the Northeast region, which was from Boston down to Washington and back over to Pittsburgh, in that area, basically doing RF studies, looking for. We bypassed the local telephone companies by doing microwave shots from building top to building top. And so I got to survey all the buildings basically in Manhattan below 60th Street. They had somebody else for up north, but so I happened to know most of the buildings. So anytime they had a microwave shot they had to put in, they usually come to me because I had a fairly large database understanding of what could be done, what couldn't be done, and I was sort of a technical liaison between sales and the rest of the company.
So then on the day of 9/11, those skills, that knowledge that you had, it came in handy. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. It started out like a normal day. Like I said, we lived 80 miles, pastored 80 miles northwest of the city. And I got up at 3 o'clock as normal and had to leave by 3:25. I left at 3:25. I made it to work by 7 o'clock. If I left at 3:35, I was late for work at 8:30. So there was a bubble there, and so I left the house around 3:30, and with normal time driving down to the city, drove into Manhattan and got a text saying that my parts for World Trade Center, which was one of our main sites, the North Tower, the parts hadn't arrived, so I ended up setting up a backup location over I went down next to the World Trade Center and took the Battery Tunnel over into Brooklyn, and went to work on the tallest building in Brooklyn, which is 67 Court Street. And we were working up there. I had one of my coworkers come in. He came in by train and stopped there, brought his toolbox with him, and we went up to work on 67 Court Street, putting in a microwave shot from the east side of East River to one of the buildings on the west side, and very close to the World Trade Centers. And about, I'm not sure what time, it was a beautiful day. I remember it was a Tuesday morning, it was breezy, and it was really pretty out. And I remember that Tom got a phone call from his wife that said some airplane crashed into the One Trade Center. And so we looked out, and it was like right up in front of us. We were only like less, 2K away, or less than 2 miles away from the towers, and I could see it. And I remember looking and seeing the smoke pouring out of the north side of the North Tower, and I noticed that it was close to where our sites were. We were on our site there was at 8814, 88th floor, 14 floors, and that's where we were located, and it was very close to the smoke coming out of the North Tower. And it looked like we thought it was some airplane that was just flying around, and happened to have crashed into the tower, which we thought was really stupid because it was a total no-fly zone. Everything over Manhattan it was no-fly, and we were watching that. And Tom was talking to his wife, and then finally he hung up with her, and we said we ought to get back over there. But as we did, we noticed that coming from the south up through from New Jersey, basically coming from the south, there was another airliner flying up into the no-fly zone, and we're going, what are they doing? They might, and we were talking about maybe it was pictures or something. They wanted to get something, and then we watched as the plane get closer and closer, and then I could see that it was a commercial airliner, and the colors on the commercial airliner, and as the plane got in closer and closer, and then at the last moment as it got in, it flipped wings vertical and went into the building with a huge explosion. And after the explosion went, the first thing Tom and I said was, somebody's trying to knock out the tallest buildings, and we happen to be on the tallest building in Brooklyn. So we thought, hey, we really better get back over to the World Trade Center, see what we can do to help. So we packed up our stuff, which didn't take very long, and went down, got into my van down at the base of 67 at the building in Brooklyn, and that happens to be the home base of the FBI there. And we got out, and the FBI had 6 black Suburbans all lined up, ready to go. They were heading back across the Brooklyn Bridge, which had already been shut down. So we just pulled in right behind them and tried to get in with the FBI, but they would have none of it, wouldn't let us go through. So we started making phone calls, trying to let everybody know that we were all right, that we weren't in the Trade Center working, that we were working, over in Brooklyn. And tried to call my wife, and couldn't get through. All the cellular communications had basically gone down or were overloaded to such an extent that you couldn't get a phone call through. So I remember stopping at payphones, but none of the payphones worked down there anyway. So it was it's kind of a silly thing, but I couldn't get through to her, and she was at home homeschooling some of our kids, and they popped out a VCR out of the thing, and in between they saw the smoke pouring out of the World Trade Centers, and they got very concerned, to say the least. So all my kids basically just came home from school. We had, did we have 10 kids? Yeah, we had 10 kids. So most of them were in school. We were homeschooling a few of them. They came home. My daughter came home from her work at a bank only a few blocks away. She just told her boss, my dad works in the Trade Center, and she just left. But they came home and they had a prayer meeting for me, which it was impressive to me. And they couldn't get in touch with me. They kept trying to call me, but no phone calls would go through. By this time, the North Tower had fallen and wiped out the building next to it, which was AT&T, which had multiple miles of communication cable. It shut down all the cellular communications basically on the island. The only way you could talk was over into Brooklyn, which was where we were, but we couldn't get through to anybody, so that they couldn't get through. So that what they did was they couldn't call me on the phone to see if I was okay or what had happened, so they started writing me emails. And I still have some of those emails that I just, one distinctive one I remember from Caleb. He was 16 years old, and he did it in all caps letter. He says, in all caps letters with exclamation points. He says, Dad, exclamation about 12 times. It says, you be the answer to our prayers. You come home, exclamation point, And that was just the idea of that. But it was much later in the afternoon that they found out that I was okay, because we were able to get on basically a long distance phone call routed from Long Island up to Connecticut and back over down to our switch down in northern area of Manhattan, and they were able to find out that I was still alive and okay, but I just couldn't get home. So we were stuck over on Long Island in Brooklyn, and I had no way to get home, so I tried to figure out where to go. So Tom invited me over to his house, but his wife happened to work for a company that booked all the ferry boats, and she was able to get me the last slot on a ferry boat going up to New London, I think it was New London, from the Orient Point out on the eastern tip of Long Island to the up north. And I finally made it home around 11:30 that night. And when I got there, the house was jammed. There were friends and neighbors and the kids, and it was just a time of just hugging and crying and trying to get through, trying to get understanding. But on the way home, I got a text that said, "You're going to be on a voice call at 6 a.m. in the morning, and you make sure you're there no matter what." So it's 6 a.m. So we ended up finally going to bed after, because we knew all the neighborhood kids and stuff. It was a very poor neighborhood, and it was an interesting time. At 6 a.m. in the morning, I got on a phone call, and they told me, they said, you need to be down here in Manhattan. Get down here. And I said, well, all the bridges and tunnels are closed. There's no way to get into it. And he said, you have a company credit card? Use it. Whatever you need, get down here, rent a boat, whatever you have to do, get down there. And he said, first though, I want you to stop over into Queens, another suburb, part of New York, and stop at the warehouse, fill up your truck with all this equipment. And he said, get over here, we're going to try and do communications for the police and fire down at Ground Zero. So I headed south as fast as I could, kissed everybody goodbye, and took off, and could not get into Queens, or I didn't think I could, but I went to one of the bridges there, and they shut it. They had it blocked off. Well, there was a problem with the raising the bridge, and they let me onto the first part of the bridge, and I just sat there for like 15 minutes, and then they finally got the bridge to go down, and they wouldn't let me back up, so I had to go forward, and I ended up in Queens, very close to the warehouse where I had to be. Pulled into the warehouse there, and as I pulled in, 2 forklifts came out of the warehouse, and they were just loaded with equipment. They filled up my van, totally filled it up, and to where I couldn't even see out my mirrors, so filled it up, and I had a friend that lived over there in Queens, worker that works, I guess, for me, and he had a pickup loaded with equipment, and we headed off, and he came up and asked me, how are we going to get into Manhattan? And I told him, I have no idea, but that's where we're going, whatever it takes. And so very close to the warehouse there was the Queens Midtown Tunnel. I remember driving down to the Queens Midtown Tunnel, and everything was blocked off with barricades, and they had MPs out there with rifles, and they were real. You could tell they weren't the fake things, but I remember just pulling up to one of the barricades, and I just rolled down my window, and I started yelling at the guy. I said, I need to get through the tunnel and get over to work at Ground Zero. And he said, the tunnel is closed, nobody's going through. And he went from order arms down to the rifle in his hands, and you could tell he was pretty serious. And I told him, I've got to go. He says, you need to move your truck and get out of here. Nobody's going through this tunnel. And I remember just sitting there saying, okay, God, how are you going to do this? And about 5 minutes later, and I could see this guy was starting to get very big guy. And he was starting to get red in the face, and he was very, very serious. And after and I just sat there, and I said, okay, God, I'll just sit here and wait on you, see what you're going to do. And after 4 or 5 minutes, all of a sudden, an officer from the military police, all I know is he had gold leafs on his shoulder. I'm not sure what it was. I think it was the Air Force AP. But he came over and just spoke into this guy's ear. And this guy all of a sudden puts his rifle back to order arms, moves the barricade, and waves me on through. I have no idea what he said or what happened. All I knew is that I was going through the Midtown Tunnel faster than I'd ever been able to go through it before. you know, and we were able to get over to our switch site, which is over on 16th and 12th. You know where exactly where I was, but it was like 40 blocks north of the ground zero. So I went over there. I was able to park right up on the street, which was crazy because there was so little traffic comparatively to what normally was. But Mark, the guy in the pickup, he had to go find a parking garage where they could watch his equipment in the truck. So I went up there and we went into our conference room, and in that conference room was my Mark, myself, my boss, my boss's boss, and then his boss. So it was the director and vice president of the whole Northeast, and he says, "Here's what we want to do. We want you and we want a couple of you to go down and check out and see if there's any way we can do a microwave shot down to ground zero. See, they're having a problem. There was no communications down there. The fire was so intense and so deep in the ground that it created so much RF noise. It created that two-way radios, nothing would work electronically. No cells, no two-way radios, nothing. It was all totally wiped out with interference. So the only communications down there, they had 8 trailers that they pulled in down at the ground zero site. They were for the police and fire and all the alphabet soup military agencies and stuff. But they had the only communications that they had was there was one pickup truck. He'd stop at each one of the 8 trailers, take any messages, and then he'd drive up to the fire command center, which was up at Canal Street, and then they'd make phone calls for him, and then he'd take messages back down. But that was the only communications at all at ground zero that first day. So I ended up going with my boss, Joe Squatrafico, and Mark and myself. The 3 of us drove down as far as we could get down to Canal Street, and then we walked down to the fire commander who was in charge of the whole site, everything. And and we told him what we were trying to do, and he said, "Go for it." And so Joe, myself, and Mark started walking down I guess it was 20-some blocks down to ground zero. And there was a lot of smoke and dust there as we walked down, but after a while you couldn't look up anymore. You had to watch where you put your feet because there was so much dust and paper, and it was slippery, so you walked in other people's footprints basically down there, so you had to be careful walking down. And we just kept on walking down, getting closer and closer down to ground zero. And then finally we stopped. It was, looked up, and this was what I considered my site. I was heavily involved in getting the World Trade Centers. I was the technical liaison for all the World Trade, Empire State, all the Port Authority buildings, and that's all the tunnels and bridges. And so I worked heavily, and that was my site. And it was just gone. I mean, and the first thing I noticed, first off, for 180 degrees in front of you to the east, it was just solid. It was like a jet engine, a huge jet engine, just blasting up out of the ground. The smoke and the fire and the heat and the noise were just amazing. Just you couldn't see through it. You couldn't do anything with it. It was just crazy, the amount of power going out of that. And then off to the right, I mean, I'm sure you all have seen pictures of the jagged metal, the pile of metal from the towers that was left over there. And there were equipment driving through and forklift and bucket trucks going through. And every time a bucket truck would come through, everybody'd stop and go to attention, because what the bucket truck was doing was carrying bones and parts of bodies to the morgue. And but we stopped there and just. And another thing I noticed was that all the other buildings that were close by there had gotten so much taller. The 84 and 87 story buildings looked so much taller than, because there wasn't the 114-story buildings, you know, to compare them to. And we felt like we were just in a canyon, just looking straight up at these buildings and didn't know what to do. And my boss, Joe Squatrafico, was a very passionate Italian man. He started screaming and hollering and saying, we're going to get the blankety blanks who did this and cut off, and you know, you can just, you know, he's very, very passionate, and I couldn't do anything. And Mark just wandered around, and so I just stopped and I said, I don't know what to do, God. And I walked over, and I just kept on walking away from this a little bit back to the north, though. And I walked over to a small light pole that was still standing. There were actually two of them. They were very ornate ones. This was a very expensive area, and it was all cobblestone, and they did it up, you know, really pretty. But I walked over, and I remember leaning up against the pole and saying, okay, God, you know, you got us down here. What do you want to do with us? And if you could just show me something, anything. And I remember looking, and all of a sudden, that's when God did it. I don't know how he stopped the smoke to where I could see through, and I could see directly over to a site that we had, a tower we had at 20 Exchange. It's all the way across the southern tip of Manhattan. And 20 Exchange, it was a 67-story building we had 4 masts on it. And I could see the 3 masts that we had equipment on over there. And I could see through it, and I could see the 3 masts, and I could see 3 little dots of the dishes on the 3rd mast. And I knew that because it was the Friday before that I'd taken that one out of service. And it was just sitting there, basically, to 1 Broadway. It was just shot to 1 Broadway. So I started getting excited. I said, we can do the shot from this pole here. And I stepped 2 feet to one side, and I couldn't see it anymore. And I stepped 2 feet to the other side, and I couldn't see it anymore. And the line of sight to that building, because of the shape of the buildings and the way the buildings are down there at the Stock Exchange buildings and all the other buildings down there, you couldn't see it except from that one little pole that I just leaned up against and asked God to show me that. So I started to yell for Joe, and I mean, it had to be loud, and I'm going, Joe, get over here! And I'm waving at him and saying, I'm pointing to the dish up there that we can do a shot to, and I'm screaming at Joe, and Joe starts to see me, and he starts to run towards me. But you can't really run in that stuff down there. And he finally comes over to me, and I'm pointing back into the smoke, saying, we can do a shot to 20 Exchange, Mast 3, the 3rd dish there, the 1 Broadway shot, and we can do a shot straight there. And he looked at me, and then he looked back into the smoke, and then he turned around and he said, are you out of your... And he started to say, and then something came over him, and like a little funny quirk on his face, and he just said, okay, let's go ahead, do it. So we ended up leaving and walking back up to our car. We stopped in at the fire command center up at Canal Street and told them that we thought we could do a microwave shot down there. So they said, I'll go for it. So we ended up driving back up to our offices up on at the my brain gives out at times at our main building that we had up north, and we stopped in and told them we thought we could do a microwave shot. So they put everything into motion to get this microwave shot and get it in process. The first thing I did was I went and speed dialed home, just to let Carolyn know, that I'd been down at Ground Zero, and I remember speed dialing in, and I heard her pick up, but I couldn't say anything. She said on the phone, and she said, Ray, is that you? And I sort of was able to sort of blurt out, yeah. And then she said, is it that bad? And I remember saying, yeah, it's that bad. And then she said something that sort of changed me. She said, God's taken us through a lot of things. And I trust God working in you, and he'll get us through this too. And I'll never forget that phone call. But then we ended up trying to get all the equipment together. We ended up with I guess 4 trucks that we had to take down there. One with a really large cabinet on it. It was a 600-pound cabinet with the little tiny wheels on it, which was a real pain to deal with. And it was an indoor cabinet, and so we had to build a tent sort of structure around it to protect it from the rain, and because it's what we had available. So we ended up loading up these trucks, and we started to head out. And the only way to get down to Ground Zero from up north was the West Side Highway. Everything else was totally blocked off. And the only way to get down there was West Side Highway. And I remember it took a few minutes for us to get onto the West Side Highway heading south. It was just one lane going south at about 10 miles an hour and one lane going north at about 10 miles an hour. And that's how all the traffic went down there for all the work, all the supplies, all the equipment. And got onto the West Side Highway. And I remember as soon as we turned onto the West Side Highway, the sides of the road were lined with people, with New Yorkers, and they're running out, giving us bottles of water and dust masks and anything we can do to help you, and they're holding up signs saying we're praying for you, and clapping for us as we're driving by. And I remember one sign said, "Be the hero we can't be." And these were the same people that a couple days before were in my way. It was, just something changed, in me on the way down to Ground Zero with that equipment. We had a plan to where Mark and myself, we were going to go help unload the big cabinet down at Ground Zero, and then we were going to head over to the other site at 20 Exchange. And down at Ground Zero, Joe Squatrafigo, my boss, and the vice president, he wanted to go down there too and work. And I said, "What do we need a suit down here for?" I mean, it just, it didn't make any sense, to me. But I wasn't a vice president, and he was, and so he went with us, and we drove down there, unloaded the cabinet, and then Mark and I left from Ground Zero, and we had to get over to the other side of the island. And the only way to do that was go back up to Canal Street and then drive across. And then we had to head south down to 20 Exchange. The problem with that was that every intersection from Canal Street all the way down to the tip of the island was barricaded off, and they had security constantly, and there was no communications. So every block we came to, they wanted to search our truck, unload the van, unload the pickup truck, search it with mirrors, go through this, and we probably went through that. It took us 4.5 hours to get from Canal Street down to 20 Exchange, down to the building down there. Now 20 Exchange was we didn't get down there till it was dark. It was like, it must have been 8:30, 9 o'clock at night when we finally made it down there. 20 Exchange is a gorgeous building. It's a 68-story building, and we were on a superstructure on top of that, a few stories above that. But the building was all, it was all not brick, but it was all marble and brass and glass. I mean, this thing was an amazing building. It was a bank building, and that's why they had power in the building still, because they had their own generators running in the building for security, basically. They had messed up on the powering of the system. We had all battery backup for our hub site there, and it was 8 hours of battery backup, but they had cut the power into the wrong power bus, and they went on the emergency bus instead of the standard bus that we were supposed to be on. So it just happened that there was power there. And it just happened that we had a fiber optic link all the way, the only fiber optic link we had down to there. And that 3 days before, they had bypassed the repeater that they had in that fiber optic link because the signal was too strong. So they took the repeater out, which only had a 4-hour battery backup. So we had communications down to only one building in southern Manhattan at all. And that just happened to be the one that I could see to, and it was just, so we got down there and and I could see that light, that red light, and I'm looking at that red light, and all of a sudden something went in front of that red light. So I said, somebody's in that building. And so I started banging on the doors, and I was really hard, and I'm yelling to him. I said, I need to get up, I'm intelligent, I gotta get up on the 67, and do a microwave shot over for the police and fire, and nothing happened. And after about 4 or 5 minutes, I just sat down there on the steps outside. This is all this ornamental brass. It was really pretty, and sat down on the steps there and said, okay, God, what are you going to do? And then I heard behind me a click, 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 as tumblers and a lock clicked, and then the door, this big, huge, I think it was 14-foot high door, opens up about 3/4 of an inch, and I hear this Eastern European voice, and the voice said, the building is closed. No one is allowed in no matter what. If I let anybody in, I lose my job. And he shut the door, and I heard the click, click, click as he locked the doors. And I just yelled at him. I said, we got to do this. This is something that has to be done. And you're the only place that it'll work from is here. And I remember sitting down on the steps there, and Mark just walked back to his truck. He'd pretty much given up after all the time going down there trying to get into it. And so I just sat down on the steps, and I remember praying, God, you brought us this far. You've shown us what we should do and how it's going to work. So I just need you to do something, God. And probably after about 3 minutes, I heard click, 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 click. And as the locks, because it's high security locks, you can tell those. And the door opened up about 3/4 of an inch, and that same Eastern European voice came out and said, I have to go work on the other side of the building, and if I happen to forget to lock this door, I just want you to let you know that elevator 4 is the only one with power. So I started screaming to Mark, and we gathered up all of our equipment that we had, and we started carrying it all in, and this guy was still there in the lobby, and I mean, this is inlaid marble floors. It's really pretty, and he ran over and locked the door behind us, and he runs over and starts picking up all my equipment. Oh, I don't want you to have to carry anything, and he takes us over to the elevator and takes us over to elevator number 4, which is the only one with power, and on the emergency bus. And he took us over there, and he said, I'll run the elevator. Sometimes it's tricky. You got to press the button, but that's fine. He took us up to 64, which it didn't go all the way up to 67. That elevator only went to 64, and then he starts carrying all my equipment up to our spaces up on 67, and we were able to go in, unlock the doors, and go in. And Mark was going to do all the wiring, which means he had to do all the cross patches on a thing to get from the fiber optic hookup to the radio, and because we'd just taken them out a few days before, so he had to wire in all that stuff, which takes a couple of hours of hard work, and I ended up having to go up and adjust the dish basically up a couple more stories, but boy, by the time I got up there, the smoke was so heavy, up at that high, and it was so thick, I'm wearing a dust mask and goggles and headlamps, and I have, handheld lamps, and I have my safety climbing harness and belt and tools and everything, and I'm walking out there into the superstructure area of the building, and going over there, and I worked my way over to mast number 3, which I knew because I just happened to work on it a couple of days before, 3 days before, well, I guess it was 4 days before, Friday before, and worked over there, and off in the distance, I couldn't see anything. Basically, I got up there and I found the dish, and I knew which one it was, and so I loosened up all the clamping on it, and I decided I needed to aim towards something. I had no idea what to do, but off in the distance, off on the horizon, sort of, I guess it was horizon, I could see just a little bit of a white spot, you know, a little bit of a light, and I said, that's got to be ground zero, because they had all the work lights down there running, and so I said I'd just aim it sort of towards there, and so I just basically turned it, you know, in azimuth to over to what I thought was ground zero, and turned it in elevation up, because 1 Broadway was a much shorter building, and I turned it azimuth and elevation, and just cranked it down the best I could, and I said I'd sort of look in that direction. These were very tight beam width dishes. I won't go into the technical, but they were only 1 foot wide, and they were 1 degree beam width, which was very difficult to line in. And I just sort of just gave it the best I could, and said okay. And then I left the roof and went down and talked to Mark. And we tried to get any kind of two-way radio or any kind of radio working from over at 20 Exchange, and we couldn't get anything to work. We had a satellite phone, which was very unusual at those times, and cellular, two or three different kinds of cellular phones. We took all these with us in case anything would work, but nothing worked. Even a two-way radio wouldn't work from 50 feet away from each other on a two-way radio, which is just amazed me that there was that much interference at over a mile away from ground zero. It was, you know, nothing would work. It was interference. So I got Mark. I had Mark stay there and wire in the rest of that, and he's going to stay at the hub there at 20 Exchange. And I decided that I'd go back over and see how they were doing with the other end of the microwave shop. And I ended up, and I thought about it and said, I'm not driving back through and getting inspected every time I go through. You know, it's just too much. So I walked, you know, and just carried what tools I needed, and then I could just check in with every checkpoint and show them an ID, and they'd let you go through. So it took me about an hour and 15 minutes to walk back over to ground zero, and walked back over there, and the first thing I saw was they had hooked up the cabinet and all the electronics and the tent structure and everything to the wrong pole. And I started hollering and screaming at my boss, and my boss's boss's boss, so yelling at him, "You're in the wrong place. I told you you can only go from here to here," and all this stuff. And I kind of lost it a little bit, and needless to say. And I remember Joe Squatrafigo, big Italian guy, and he just puts his hands up like this, and he goes, "Hey, Ray, don't sweat it. We'll move." You know, and so we did. It took us 2 hours to take down the microwave dish down and put it on the cabinet, and then that VP, that suit that was out there working, he'd taken a half sheet of plywood, and he's out there shoveling a path so we can get that down to that, and he's shoveling down. Later on, he showed me the blisters and blood, you know, from just shoveling a path so we could get down there. And Joe and I worked at moving the cabinet, which was on these little tiny metal coasters over cobblestone, which wasn't not a very good thing. But we finally got it down there after about 2 hours, and Joe hooked the dish up on these very short, very ornate light poles, and he hooked the outdoor unit and the dish basically up to the outdoor up there, and he asked me. He said, "Where do we align this to?" And I said, "Well, you know, come on a little bit over to this way," and I said, "You know, come up a couple more degrees," and he just cranked it on down and said, "Yeah, it'll have to do." And so then we started turning up the equipment. We had to turn up the generator. We had hand generator basically, and turned up the generator, got this big cabinet all running, and everything on it was read everything, because there was no inputs anywhere. And so we got everything running, and we turned on the radio basically, and it turned totally red because it hadn't been aligned yet, and nothing would work. And got it all basically online, got it all set up there. But like I said, these were very narrow beam widths, and you got to do a major alignment. On a good day with communications and clear sight, it'll take you 4 hours to get a shot in is really good. but with no communications, you can't see anything because of the smoke and that. We had no idea. And Joe asked me, he said, how are we going to align this path? And I looked at Joe and said, Joe, God's going to have to help us. And the shot, all of a sudden, the radio went totally green, which is, just crazy. And all of a sudden, the other cabinet, all the DMUX, the rest of the cabinet, the DMUX sites, everything started going green, and you hear it clicking and clicking in. And Bill Lismore, that VP that was just looking at us at that point, he just kept staring at that radio, just saying, he said, you have it in loopback. And I said, no, it's not in loopback. I checked it, and it wasn't in loopback. And we had, going from, we figured that if we could get neg 80s, I know the numbers aren't going to mean anything, but if we get neg 80s, we'll be all right. We'll have enough to be able to communicate and then align the dishes. But, we couldn't, when we originally put it up, it was nothing, neg 100s or whatever. And we ended up having perfect path, which is, that doesn't happen. And Bill Lismore, my VP, just kept staring at that radio going, well, I don't understand this. And Joe and I started screaming, just going crazy, trying to, well, Joe went over and picked up the order wire, which is it runs over top of the radio system, and he yelled at Mark, who was over at the other site, and Mark said he almost wet his pants. He said he wasn't expecting anything to come out of there ever, to be honest. And Joe really didn't think anything would really work anyways. But they started hooking up wiring to all the trailers, and because we had a comm site up there, they brought down some more wirers, guys, to go in and wire up all the 8 trailers. And we put in 2 voice lines and a fax data line to every one of the trailers. And then I had to leave because my truck was still over at 20 Exchange, and they wanted me to go work on some other microwave shots that were over for the stock exchanges, because the telephone company told the stock exchanges it'd be 90 days before they'd be back on the air, both the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. I'm not sure where the Amex was. Didn't have anything to do with that. But we decided that we could do some microwave shots for them too, and try to get them on air, sooner somehow. So I ended up walking back over to 20 Exchange, checked in with Mark, and he stayed there, just in case they needed anything. And then I went and worked on this other shot with a whole bunch of our people that came in from Philadelphia. And we were putting in microwave shots for the cellular companies, trying to put them in. They weren't nearly as difficult because it wasn't at ground zero, but they were still. And so I remember working on that for like a day and a half, and then I went back down to ground zero. And the same VP that had been down there was still down there working, and he had taken a sheet of plywood and put it between 2 coat racks and tied it up there, and he put 24 telephones on it. I don't know where he got the telephones from. He got 24 telephones on it, and he opened up all the lines on the whole thing, and so that all the workers down there at ground zero could make phone calls. Most of them hadn't been able to talk to anybody in their families for like 3 days, and so these are guys that have been working like crazy and digging through that pile and looking for bodies and stuff. And everybody was ordered to take a break and go make a phone call. And so, we got that done, which was just one thing after another that God did to work this out. And in the meantime, they were able to get 8 microwave shots up, and the terrorists had counted on us, no communications for a long time in the stock exchanges, financial markets to being devastated by it, which they were definitely impacted. But 9/11 was on Tuesday morning, and the following Monday morning, the New York Stock Exchange came back online, and the Amex, and the NASDAQ came back online in only 6 days, which was just, our little company had been going through financial troubles, and we had ripped out a lot of equipment, and it was all in a warehouse in Queens. And we were able to just take that tested, tested equipment. He said, I want you to go home and spend Sunday with your family. He knew that I was a pastor of the church, and Carolyn and I co-pastored that, and she preached, I thank the Lord, on Sunday. But I got back there for Sunday. He said, but make sure you're back here Monday morning first thing. And I went down there, and the church was full on Sunday, as I think almost all churches in the United States were full, or at least, tremendous amount of people carrying that. Well, I ended up getting back down to our headquarters down at our switch down in Manhattan on Monday morning. And on Monday morning we were having an all company-wide, all hands video conference nationwide. There were some areas that were just on video links because they hadn't been built. They were on audio links. They hadn't built the video links yet, basically. But there was like 3,200 people on this call. They were down there at 10 o'clock. And at 9:30, Bill Lismore, that VP, he came over to me and he said, Ray, I haven't been to church in a long time. And he said, if I could have yesterday, I would have gone to church. But I was wondering, would you mind preaching a sermon for us this morning on the call? And out of that whole company, I didn't know a single born-again Christian, not one. And so, I told Bill, I said, I'll do it, whatever, that's fine. And I remember started off, and Bill introduced me. He said, there were some remarkable things I've seen down here, he says, and I just want Ray to start this off on the proper tone. And so I got to tell him that God didn't do this terrible thing. He didn't do it. It was people. But God did allow it. And we do have responsibility. And we have a lot of work to do. And I got to tell him about Jesus. And that how he changed my life. And that he could change their life. And after 15 minutes, I turned it back over to Bill, and I don't remember anymore. All I know is I got to preach to the biggest congregation I've ever had for about 15 minutes, which was pretty impressive as far as I'm concerned. And God changes things. Now, my boss's boss was very offended. He was very devout Buddhist, and from there on out, I got the worst of the worst jobs. I was in the smoke all the time for the next 2 months. And after 2 months, I ended up with a case. They didn't know what it was, but I was in the hospital, and it was, they said it was similar to pneumonia, but they said it wasn't pneumonia, so they didn't know. So they treated it, and I got better, but then on the third day, they called me up and said, you need to get back in here, the company's in trouble. And on my way back down, they said, just go to the building and the security will escort you into your locker. You can clean it out. The company's gone. It's shut down. And so I did that, and I remember going home, and I couldn't get a hold of any of the other people in the company. That company was, for me, that was my ministry. Carolyn, my wife, took care of the church at home. She ran everything, took care of everything, made it work. But my ministry was to those people down there in Manhattan. I had so many different times, so many different people that came. These people were living in a post-Christian society in Manhattan. They had no idea about. I had a couple come to me. I remember coming to me, and they found out that she was pregnant, and they decided that they wanted to raise their child as a religious person. And first off, they asked, "What do we call you? Do we call you father or rabbi or what?" They had no idea about anything to do with religion or what it stood for. And I tried to explain to these people in the simplest terms, about Jesus, And I'd get to work early every day because I had that bubble to get to work, and I had an hour, almost an hour and a half, to where I could have that. And I had people just come up to me constantly, and I got to pray with them and talk to them about it. And that was my ministry. But then all of a sudden, my ministry was gone, and I was depressed. You know, I still had money coming in for the company. The company still had a pretty good severance package. They kept me going for a couple of months through the winter up there. But basically, that was the end of 9/11. And I lost contact with almost all the people down there. And like I said, I had a hard time finding another job, looking for one, you know, especially one that it wasn't in the city. I haven't been back to the city, I think, except maybe once to pick up some equipment. I haven't even been back since in the last 20 years. There's a lot to cover, and it's very emotional. You know, the World Trade Center was my baby. You know, I was part of what they called the A-team. We had 3 sales reps, sales and real estate, 2 real estate guys, and I was a technical liaison, and I considered that my baby. You know, that was home, and then when it was just gone, it was like, just avoid. You know, hard. There was a grieving process, and there was a grieving process after 9/11 too, especially after and I got sick after that, and ended up with, you know, we could go through all the stuff, but I'm still waiting on help from 9/11 and some of the other people that were down there that we knew that they lost their lives down there, firemen and friends of ours from church camp and things like that worked down there, and so, but it's an ongoing story, you know, it really is. I had a melanoma tumor on the back shoulder about 6 years ago, and small, very small. You know, they diagnosed it as a cancer, and they operated on it and said it was totally gone. And then I got checked for the first, you know, after 6 months, and then every year after that, and they said no cancer, everything's clear. But then I got really sick this past December, and my friend took me down up to the VA hospital in Cleveland, and they took me in, and they said it's not good. It's multiple myeloma, metastasized to where there's at least 20 tumors. We can't tell. There's so many. There's other ones that are hidden. So throughout my body, and I'm okay. You know, that's fine. I had a hard time getting through the trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. You know, trying to get through that, and it's they've put me on various medications. They're doing everything they can possibly do to keep me alive. You know, but the end's not far away. You know, it's they originally said 4 to 6 weeks. You know, would probably be the max. You know, I'd probably be alive. But they've got me on some fantastic meds that were these guys that won a Nobel Peace Prize for these meds. You know, which is really pretty impressive. And I got on those for a while, but I ended up getting headaches from those so bad, severe, that I had to get off those. And then they put me on other ones that were infusion, which is where they give me every 2 weeks. They give me an injection, an infusion of a pint of all kinds of chemicals. I don't even know what they are exactly, but then I ended up having itchiness from those, and they said I couldn't go on with those, and so they wanted me to. They basically told me that it wouldn't be long that I'd be gone again, but I had, during my time from ground zero, I had ended up with a narcolepsy, and they finally got me. A specialist came up with a solution for me, not a solution, but a way to get around my narcolepsy, where I couldn't do anything but sleep, and hard time staying awake for anything. And got through that with this one psychoactive drug, trazodone. And so I decided that maybe it was the trazodone that was causing these BRAF drugs, these specialty pills that I was taking to cause the headaches. And so I weaned myself off the trazodone, and went back to taking the other drugs, the Baraf, and now it's and they said, wow, this could work, because now I don't sleep much. I have a hard time sleeping, but I can get through, and the drugs are actually working to a certain extent, except now the drugs, it appears, have caused, because I have tumors throughout my body, I have another one directly on an aorta, on my heart, and on my liver, and we won't go into all the details, but now my blood pressure has gone way down. I ended up spending 6 days in the hospital because of blood pressure, and heartbeat was down to like 32, and so things like that. So it's not going to be too much longer that I'm physically going to be around down here, unless God comes up with another miracle, and then I'm not opposed to that at all. I'm living a wonderful life. I'm having a great time. God has given me, put things in my hands to do. And if you want joy in your life, just do the thing God gives you to do to the best of your ability, and be grateful for it. And out of gratefulness emanates joy. And all I can say is my life is just full of joy, because I'm so grateful to what God has done. He has blessed me in so many ways, from 9/11 to even like I got to go down and do cleanup after Katrina down in New Orleans and things. And I've been in the right place at the right time for God to let me just do so many different things. And I remember, things like Vietnam and all that, which are, tough and hard times in life, and coming back. But I have been so blessed. He's given me fantastic support groups. I mean, not only have I had the nurses and stuff at the VA hospital and Cleveland Clinic and even the James down in Cleveland. I've been to all these different hospitals and stuff, and people have been wonderful. But I have a support group of people at the church that pray for me. They pray for me all the time. And I have other people that are praying for me, and it's crazy. And I have a wonderful wife. It's just, I would never trade her in on anything. She's been the support of my life, and I love her so much. And I have 10 children, and I have brothers and sisters, brothers and physical brothers and sisters, and brothers and sisters in the Lord. And I have a wonderful life. And you say I'm dying. Well, so be it. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going out. I don't want to go out with a whimper. I'm going out with a bang. I'm enjoying it. At my funeral, I want balloons there and stuff. I want to, it's a party time. Now the people that are left behind. That's what I'm concerned about now. It's trying to do due diligence to get everything in line for them. But I know where I'm going, and I know a lot of the people that I'm looking forward to seeing, and I'm good to go. I am. The Lord just keeps on blessing. Just trust your dad. Trust your dad. He knows who you are. I got to say this to one of my sons just a couple days ago. And he said, this will probably be the last time I ever see you, Dad. What do you have to say to me? And I told him, just trust in your dad. Not your physical dad, but trust in your Heavenly Father. You can rest in that. And you can truly rest in that. And all this hoopla and everything, and all the, you will never find any more joy in life than what emanates from gratefulness that just rises up out of that. So just be grateful and learn to relax sometimes. Take it easy now and then, but then go at whatever God puts in your hands. Give it full. Give it to all you got, and you'll have joy.
Do you have any parting words for us before we go today? Anything you'd like to share?
Parting words.
Okay.
What?
You want to bring
They looked up climbing.
Oh.
That's one of the biggest
So
things
what-
in your life.
One of the biggest things in my life that I had to do is, I'd like to say, we ended up being clowns, a clown troupe, and we ended up traveling on the road and doing clown ministries all over the country, and my kids were clowns, and the blessings that we got to do, shared from clowning and learning from that. But God didn't call me to be an evangelist, to be a great evangelist or a great preacher or whatever. God just called me to be a dad and to be solid. And if you can just stop there and hold on and just be a rock, just be a rock who God has a plan for your life, just be there. And the clown ministry, he's given me so many different things to do, and it's been so much fun. I mean, life is exciting, and life isn't dreary. Life is just a miracle after miracle, and you can see it. And I've seen his miracle works. I've seen it not just in actual physical things. I've seen it in spiritual and in emotional. And I keep seeing these miracles God has for us in life. And life is an exciting adventure. And the adventure doesn't wear out, doesn't get old. It gets better. The more you know, the more you can just rest on him, the better the adventure is.